Billionaire dad sees Waitress. Help disabled son. Play piano, then changes her life forever. In the bustling heart of Midtown Manhattan, a simple moment can ignite a life-altering story. Emily Carter, a determined young waitress, is working the late shift at the legendary Sparrow Diner when she sees a timid boy in a wheelchair longing to touch the piano at the restaurant's edge. She has no idea this child's father, an unassuming man in dark slacks and a baseball cap, is billionaire Charles Montgomery, head of a global tech conglomerate. In one moment of pure kindness, Emily helps the boy find his harmony on those worn-out piano keys. Little does she know her own life is about to be transformed forever. It was nearing 9 o'clock on a humid Tuesday evening, and the iconic neon sign outside the Sparrow Diner flickered its pinkish glow onto the sidewalk below. On most days, the diner remained busy with locals' hospital workers from nearby Mercy General and exhausted tourists looking for a late bite. But that evening, the stream of customers had slowed, giving Emily Carter, a slender, observant waitress in her early 20s, a much-needed breath of fresh air. Emily was a petite brunette with warm hazel eyes and a quick smile. She had a natural grace in her movements, even while juggling trays of steaming coffee mugs and plates stacked high with cheeseburgers. Despite her youth, Emily exuded a quiet maturity. She had practically raised her younger sister after their father left, and their mother fell into a spiral of depression. Now she was juggling 2 jobs and a night school program, aiming for a better life. Not exactly a glamorous life, but it was hers, and she refused to let cynicism overtake her heart. The diner itself was a comfortable relic of the 1970s, with red vinyl booths and a checkerboard floor. In one corner stood an upright piano. Over the years, countless local musicians and passers-by had sat at that piano, leaving their music in the air. Emily had come to love that battered instrument. In quiet moments, she would play it, although no one at the diner besides the long-time cook, Frankie, knew she occasionally practiced there after closing. This particular Tuesday, however, would not remain quiet for long. There was an electricity in the air that Emily could feel but couldn't place. She glanced at her watch and sighed. 45 minutes till she could close her shift, head home, and work on her marketing assignments for her night course. Just as she tucked her notepad in her apron, she heard the chime of the diner door. In walked a man, wearing a simple shirt and dark slacks, followed by a boy in a wheelchair, who appeared about 9 or 10. Emily caught a glimpse of the child's face, timid, curious, and bright, despite the obvious challenges he faced. The boy's right leg was in a brace, and his left arm seemed to rest limply on the arm of the wheelchair. The man's cap cast a shadow over his face, obscuring it, so that Emily couldn't get a good look at him. She saw him gently guide the wheelchair to a nearby booth and check his phone, while murmuring softly to the boy. Their hushed conversation was drowned out by the noise of the grill and the soft hum of the overhead lights. Emily approached them with her usual service smile. "Welcome to the Sparrow Diner. Can I get you both something to drink?" she asked warmly. The man smiled back, revealing just a hint of dimples. "Coffee for me, please," he replied in a low voice. He turned to the boy and asked Jacob, "Do you want your usual apple juice?" Jacob nodded, eyes darting around the diner. Then, as his gaze landed on the upright piano, it seemed to linger. The man also noticed the piano and gently placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. There was a silent understanding between them. Emily sensed a story hidden there, but she chose not to probe. She was a waitress after all, and she had learned that people often carried burdens they were reluctant to share. She jotted down their drinks, told them she'd be right back, and moved to the counter where she poured the coffee. As she prepared the apple juice, She glanced over at the booth. The man was now leaning over the table, speaking softly to his son, who nodded timidly but kept looking at the piano. Emily returned with the drinks, placing them gently on the table. "Is there anything else I can get you right now?" "Our special is fried chicken and waffles tonight," she offered. The man seemed to consider it before responding. "That sounds good for me. Jacob, do you want mac and cheese or something else?" Jacob's voice was barely audible. "Mac and cheese, please," he whispered, still trying to sneak glances at the piano. Emily noted the order and was about to head back to the kitchen when Jacob finally spoke up in a tiny voice. "Miss," he said, "can anyone play that piano?" Emily paused, her heart stirring with an emotion she could not name. "Of course," she answered gently, though it's a bit out of tune. "But you're welcome to try." Jacob's eyes lit up for a split second before his gaze flickered to his father, seeking permission. The man nodded with encouragement, and Jacob managed a small, hopeful smile. Maybe after dinner, Emily offered, softly returning the boy's smile. She had no idea how that simple exchange would change the course of her life forever. Charles Montgomery was not a man who easily blended into a crowd. Usually he was dressed in high-end suits, escorted by a small team of assistants and security personnel. However, for this impromptu evening out with his son, he had chosen to dress down, wearing a casual shirt, dark slacks, and a baseball cap. He wasn't trying to hide from the world, so much as give Jacob a taste of normalcy. As the CEO and visionary behind Montgomery Innovations, a tech conglomerate known for advanced AI and philanthropic endeavors, Charles had billions at his disposal. Yet no amount of money had fixed Jacob's congenital physical conditions. Jacob was the product of Charles's turbulent marriage to Elizabeth, a brilliant concert pianist who had captivated audiences worldwide before succumbing to an aggressive form of cancer. Jacob had been born with partial paralysis on his left side and a neurological condition that required constant medical care. Losing Elizabeth had crushed Charles, leaving him to navigate fatherhood alone. He poured all his resources into finding the best doctors and therapies for Jacob. He also fought battles in the corporate boardroom with vultures who wanted to exploit any sign of weakness in the Montgomery name. Wealth and power had become an armor for him, but also a cage that kept him distant from genuine human connection. Which is why it was a surprise even to Charles that he had driven out that evening to a modest diner in Midtown. The night started as a simple father-son outing. Jacob had asked if they could go somewhere quiet and normal, away from the stares and the pity. Charles knew that as a single dad, he couldn't solve everything with money. So he decided to take his old sedan, the one he kept for sentimental reasons, and drive with Jacob to a place nobody would expect to see him. No fanfare, no paparazzi, no staff. Now, as he watched Emily walk back to the kitchen to place their order, Charles felt a pang of curiosity. There was a kindness in her face he rarely encountered in his social circles. In those circles, almost everything was transactional. He admired the gentle yet confident way she had invited Jacob to play the piano. It was the sort of invitation that Charles struggled to voice himself, possibly because he was afraid to watch his son struggle. Jacob had inherited his mother's love for music, but because of his motor limitations, he couldn't master the piano as Elizabeth once did. Nevertheless, the piano seemed to be a special place for him. Jacob, meanwhile, could barely contain his excitement for the chance to touch those keys. The father and son sipped their drinks, talking in hushed voices. Charles scrolled through his phone, scanning emails that demanded his attention. One message stood out, a mention of a philanthropic event that Bill Gates was hosting in a few weeks. Charles and Bill had met through various tech conferences, and Bill had once privately donated to a medical center that specialized in Jacob's condition. Seeing Bill's name reminded Charles of the public obligations looming around the corner, but he deliberately put the phone away. Tonight was about Jacob. When Emily returned with their food, the smell of fried chicken waffles and cheesy pasta wafted through the booth. Jacob eyed his mac and cheese eagerly, but his attention flitted once more to the upright piano by the window. Emily set the plates down with a friendly smile. "Enjoy," she said, and then, almost as an afterthought, "I can ask my manager if you'd like to use the piano for a quick tune after dinner. I don't think anyone would mind. It doesn't get much use at this hour." Charles gave a small nod and a half smile. "That would be nice." "Thank you," he said, his voice subdued. Emily headed off to serve another table, her footsteps echoing across the linoleum floor. Charles caught himself following her with his eyes. Something about her reminded him of Elizabeth, maybe the simple compassion. He chastised himself for allowing that thought to linger. Emily was just a waitress. He told himself, someone living her life with no idea who was sitting in her booth. Yet a stirring of gratitude and curiosity took root in Charles's mind as he watched Jacob devour his mac and cheese with gusto. Perhaps it was the diner's unpretentious charm, or maybe it was the warmth Emily exuded, but for the first time in ages, Charles felt human, rather than just a billionaire dealing with life's endless complexities. Dinner passed in a surprisingly peaceful haze. Jacob finished his meal, and Charles picked at his waffles, more interested in the subdued joy painting his son's face than in his own appetite. Emily collected their empty plates, refilled Charles's coffee, and lingered for a moment. "So are you two ready to check out the piano?" she asked, nodding toward the corner. "I talked to my manager, Winston. He said it's fine." Jacob beamed, although a hint of shyness tugged at his eyes. He glanced at Charles for approval. Charles nodded, pushing himself out of the booth, then helped maneuver Jacob's wheelchair around the tables to the side of the diner. Once they reached the piano, Jacob locked the wheelchair brakes. Emily stood a short distance away, trying to give father and son some space. Jacob hesitated. His right hand lifted toward the keys, but his left arm remained limp at his side. He tried to scoot forward in the wheelchair, eager to press a key or two, but the position was awkward. His foot braces and the chair's arms made it difficult to get close enough. Charles instinctively reached out to help, but Emily, noticing the boy's frustration, carefully approached. "Would you mind if I help?" she asked politely. Jacob nodded slowly, the excitement in his eyes flickering with concern that he might not be able to reach the keys properly. With Charles looking on, Emily moved a nearby stool and stood behind Jacob. She gently guided the wheelchair a bit closer and then moved his right hand over the keys. "Is that comfortable for you?" she asked. He gave her a timid nod. His fingers came down on a note, producing a slightly out-of-tune sound that echoed in the near-empty diner. The boy's face lit up, as if he'd discovered a hidden treasure. Emily offered, "I know a little bit about piano. Maybe I can play a few notes on the lower keys while you play the higher ones." Jacob looked up at her eyes, glimmering with gratitude. "Yes, please," he whispered. Charles watched a knot forming in his throat. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried an unexpected weight. For a brief moment, he felt an almost overwhelming sense of guilt for all the times he had been too busy, too guarded, or too uncomfortable to facilitate moments like this for his son. Being a billionaire father had not granted him more time or more confidence in dealing with his child's disability. If anything, it had made him overprotective and awkward. Emily sat on the stool so she could press the lower keys. She played a simple childlike melody, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," and Jacob joined in tentatively with the higher notes. The music was far from perfect, but it carried a genuine sweetness that resonated throughout the diner. Even Winston, the gruff, middle-aged manager, peeked out from the kitchen to watch. It wasn't lost on Charles how carefully Emily was watching Jacob's cues, adjusting her playing to match his fumbling tempo, letting him shine in that humble moment. The whole diner, fluorescent lights, vinyl booths, scuffed floors, seemed to transform into a tiny concert hall for an audience of one father and a smattering of late-night patrons. By the end of the tune, Jacob was giggling a sound as rare as a gem in Charles's life these days. When the last note died away, there was a smattering of applause from a few tables. Emily and Jacob both blushed, and Charles found himself clapping quietly too. He crouched down, placing a gentle hand on Jacob's shoulder. "You did great, buddy," he said, voice trembling just a bit. He turned to Emily. "Thank you," he said simply. But behind those words lay a depth of gratitude he had never felt toward a stranger. Emily gave a modest shrug. "It was my pleasure. Jacob's a natural, I can tell." Jacob grinned up at her. "Thank you, miss. That was the most fun I've had in a while." Something in Emily's face softened. She patted Jacob's shoulder lightly. "Keep practicing. You have a real ear for it." With that, Emily excused herself to check on her other tables, leaving father and son to bask in the afterglow of that small, magical moment. Neither Charles nor Jacob realized it yet, but the unassuming waitress had just planted a seed of change in their lives, one that would soon blossom beyond any of their imaginations. After a few minutes of companionable silence, Charles guided Jacob back to their booth. The boy's face was still flushed with excitement. Charles glanced at the check, then tucked his credit card inside the leather folder. He noticed a line scrawled at the bottom. "Thank you for letting me play Mr. Jacob. Please come back anytime." It was signed simply as Emily. When Emily returned to process the payment, Charles handed her the folder. In that moment, he felt a sudden urge to offer something in return for her kindness. "Excuse me, Emily." He began, his voice a bit hesitant. "I'd like to leave a tip, but is there anything you need? Tuition? A medical bill? Anything at all?" She paused clearly, taken aback by the question. "That's very generous of you, but I'm fine," she said, a slight flush creeping across her cheeks. I appreciate the thought." Emily didn't want to mention how her student loans were piling up, or the fact that her younger sister's doctor bills still needed to be paid. She refused to appear pitiful or needy. Over the years, she had grown fiercely independent. Charity made her uncomfortable, a reminder of how her own father had vanished, leaving their family scrambling. She refused to rely on anyone else like that again. Charles studied her face, noting the flicker of pride behind her eyes. He admired that. "I see," he said gently, not pushing the matter further. Instead, he added a considerable tip on the check, one Emily wouldn't notice until she went to the register. He then thanked her once more, his gaze lingering on the name tag pinned to her uniform. She was simply Emily, a waitress at a small diner. But to him, in that moment, she embodied kindness in a pure, unfiltered form. As Charles and Jacob exited the diner, bell chimed softly behind them. Emily watched them go. She had served thousands of patrons, but these two stood out. Something about the father's subdued humility and the boy's earnest joy stirred her heart. She was grateful she could be part of that small piece of happiness. Little did she know the next time she encountered Charles Montgomery, it would be under far more dramatic circumstances, ones that would test the limits of her resilience and compassion. Life did not slow down for Emily after that night. She returned home to her cramped apartment, in a rundown building on the Lower East Side, where the hallway lights flickered ominously. Her younger sister Lucy was already asleep on their small couch. Lucy's textbooks from her nursing program were scattered across the coffee table. Emily draped a blanket over her before retreating to her own bedroom, which was little more than a closet with a bed. She booted up her second-hand laptop to work on a marketing paper that was due in a few days, but her mind kept drifting to that father and son at the diner. In her world, acts of gentle humanity were rare, overshadowed by the daily grind of surviving. That's why Jacob's innocent joy and Charles's quiet gratitude had stayed with her. She shook her head, reminding herself she had bigger concerns: rent due, in a week her sister's tuition, her own school fees, and an ever-present stack of credit card bills. A few days passed in a blur of classes, double shifts, and barely any sleep. One afternoon, a call came in from Lucy's phone while Emily was hurrying between classes. She answered, breathless to hear her sister in tears. Mum's in trouble," Lucy whispered shakily. "The landlord's threatening to evict her because she hasn't paid rent in months, and now Mum's on one of her benders. She won't talk to me." Emily closed her eyes, exhaustion and frustration colliding. Their mother lived in a dingy one-bedroom apartment across town, supported by a small government allowance. She was rarely sober these days, her once vibrant spirit ravaged by depression and alcoholism. "All right, I'll talk to her," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll see if Winston can give me an advance on my paycheck." Lucy sniffled on the other end. "I'm sorry, Em. You already do so much." "It's okay." "We're family," Emily replied, though she felt anything but okay. Her meager savings had already been depleted from past crises. Where was she going to find the extra funds now? Over the next few weeks, Emily's life seemed to unravel. Her mother refused to go to rehab. The landlord was threatening legal action. Lucy's financial aid was delayed, leaving her short on tuition. Emily's credit cards maxed out. Sleep became a luxury as she often worked 16-hour days plus classes at night. One cold evening after finishing her shift at the diner, Emily made her way to a local pawn shop. She had decided to pawn her cherished guitar, a gift from her father before he disappeared. She hadn't played it in ages, but it still pained her to let go. The guitar was her last tangible link to a simpler time before her family splintered. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. She walked out of the shop with a fraction of what the guitar was worth, barely enough to cover half her mother's back rent. Exhausted, she stumbled back to her apartment. Lucy was at work, and Emily sank onto the couch, tears finally breaking free. How had her life become this endless cycle of crisis management? She thought of that moment at the diner, with Jacob's smile. Something about it had felt like hope. While Emily's life was spiraling, Charles Montgomery was facing his own storm. A month had passed since that evening at the diner, and Jacob had often mentioned Miss Emily, remembering her gentleness. Charles considered returning to the diner, but each time he planned to do so, he was derailed by crises at Montgomery Innovations. A competitor was filing a patent lawsuit, claiming that Montgomery Innovations had infringed on proprietary AI technology. The lawsuit threatened to drag on for months and cost millions in legal fees. Additionally, a scandal erupted when a mid-level executive was caught embezzling funds from one of the company's philanthropic branches. The media latched onto every detail, painting Montgomery Innovations with suspicion. Though Charles's personal wealth insulated him, the constant headlines were a nightmare for public relations. To top it off, Jacob's health took a turn for the worse, with a series of seizures forcing Charles to devote even more time to hospital visits and consultations with specialists. One late afternoon, as Charles sat in his opulent office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, he received a call from Dr. Michael Albright, Jacob's primary physician and a trusted confidant. "I have some concerning news," Dr. Albright began. "Jacob's motor functions seem to be declining faster than expected. We need to accelerate his physical therapy and possibly consider a new medical device that could improve his mobility. It's still in the experimental stage, but preliminary results are promising." "How soon can we get it?" Charles asked, heart pounding. "There's a significant waiting list and it's quite expensive," Dr. Albright admitted. "But with your resources, I don't care about the cost," Charles interrupted. "I only care about whether it will help Jacob." Dr. Albright sighed. "I understand. Let's schedule a meeting with the specialists and see how quickly we can arrange it." Charles ended the call and stared at the city lights outside. He had more money than he could ever spend, yet it never felt like enough when it came to Jacob's health. He felt powerless. Money couldn't buy a cure for his son's condition. And still he had a company in crisis and personal relationships on shaky ground. Once upon a time, he had believed that wealth was the key to security and happiness. But in moments like these, he felt the hollowness of that belief. Jacob's mention of Emily kept returning to him. Something about that brief encounter at the diner had been so pure. No corporate motives, no financial transactions, just a waitress showing kindness. Charles longed for that kind of simplicity in his life, especially for Jacob's sake. Unbeknownst to him, the opportunity to reconnect with Emily would present itself much sooner than he expected, and under the most dramatic circumstances. Another couple of weeks passed, and the weather turned harsher. One night, after another grueling shift, Emily stepped out of the diner. She huddled into her thin jacket, bracing against the biting wind that snaked through the Manhattan streets. She looked at her phone midnight. Her feet ached, and she still had to catch the subway back to her apartment. She was about to head down the block when a sleek black SUV sped around the corner, skidding on the wet pavement. In a shocking instant, the vehicle slammed on its brakes, screeching to a halt, just feet from Emily. She stumbled backward, dropping her bag in the puddle. The passenger door flew open, and out jumped a tall figure. "Are you all right?" came a voice, urgent but oddly familiar. Emily steadied herself, her heart hammering. She looked up to see Charles Montgomery's worried face illuminated by the streetlight. He was wearing a tailored coat, but his expression was one of genuine concern. "Mr. Montgomery," she managed, still stunned. She recognized him instantly, despite the last time she'd seen him being in casual clothes and a baseball cap. Charles offered a hand to help her up. "I'm so sorry. My driver lost control for a second." "Are you hurt?" Shaking her head. Emily tried to catch her breath. No, I'm fine. Just startled." She realized her bag was soaked and bent down to retrieve it. A few personal items spilled out: a worn wallet, a bus pass, and some overdue bills. Charles stooped to help collect her things, pausing when he saw the date on one of the bills. It was overdue by weeks. He quickly averted his eyes, not wanting to invade her privacy. "Let me at least drive you home," he offered, voice tinged with apology. "It's the least I can do after that scare." Emily hesitated. She didn't want to owe him a favor, but her feet were killing her, and the nearest subway station was 8 blocks away. Seeing her pause, Charles gently insisted, "I promise my driver is more careful. Please let me do this." She relented, climbing into the back of the luxurious SUV. The interior smelled of fine leather, and Emily felt out of place. Charles sat beside her, glancing occasionally to ensure she was truly unhurt. They rode in an awkward silence until Emily mustered the courage to speak. "Jacob." "How is he?" she asked softly, remembering the boy's eager grin at the piano. A small smile broke Charles's tension. "He's managing. His condition is a constant challenge, but we're working on experimental treatments. He still talks about you sometimes." Emily felt her chest tighten. She hadn't expected to leave such an impression. "He's sweet. I'm glad he enjoyed playing the piano." Charles nodded, studying the passing streetlights. "He did. You have no idea how much that moment meant to him and to me." He paused, then took a breath as though summoning courage. "Listen, I want to repay your kindness somehow. Please, if there's anything you need, anything at all. I know you said you were fine, but—" She bristled, remembering her pride. She didn't want to be some charity case. "I'm all right, just busy with work and school." Charles did not push further. Instead, he asked for her address, and she gave it reluctantly. When they arrived at her building, he frowned at the dilapidated entrance. She thanked him, stepping out quickly. The driver got out as well, offering to escort her inside, but she declined. Before she closed the car door, Charles handed her a business card. "In case you change your mind," he said softly. "Please call me anytime." She nodded stiffly and dashed up the steps, not looking back. Upstairs, she found Lucy asleep again on the couch. The tension in Emily's chest refused to subside as she peeled off her wet jacket. Charles Montgomery, a billionaire who nearly ran her over, had just offered her a ride home and gave her his personal card. It felt surreal, as though she were a side character, stumbling into someone else's soap opera. She glanced down at the sleek, embossed card. Below the name Charles Montgomery, CEO. Montgomery. Innovations was a personal phone number. She tucked the card away in a drawer. She had no intention of calling. Her life, complicated as it was, had taught her to rely on no one but herself. Little did she know, fate had other plans. 2 days later, Emily was at work again, her mind swirling with anxieties. She had just learned that her mother was arrested for public intoxication, and Lucy had borrowed some of Emily's textbooks without asking. The frustration and stress weighed heavily on Emily's shoulders. By the end of her shift, she was beyond exhausted. While closing out the register, she glimpsed a man in a suit slip into a booth. He was older, with salt and pepper hair, and carried an air of importance. She had seen him before, months ago, a business associate of Winston's. He never tipped well, always seemed rushed. Emily sighed mentally, preparing to serve one last table before heading home. She approached with a notepad in hand. "Hello, sir. What can I get you?" The man barely looked up from his phone. "Coffee black, and a slice of whatever pie you have. Quickly, please." Emily forced a polite smile and hurried to the kitchen, rummaging through the dessert cooler for a slice of lemon meringue pie. On her way back, she overheard the man speaking on the phone, his tone both urgent and dismissive. Yes, I understand. But the board meeting with Charles Montgomery can't be postponed," he snapped. "This lawsuit is a ticking time bomb. Do you realize what's at stake here?" Emily nearly stumbled. Charles Montgomery. Her mind raced. Could this man be connected to Charles's business? She tried to tamp down her curiosity, but the conversation was happening right there in the open. Well then, we'll have to prepare for the possibility of losing the deal with the Gates Foundation. Montgomery's philanthropic ties won't save him if the patent infringement case goes south. Yes, schedule the next hearing. And get me those numbers. Good night. He ended the call with a frustrated sigh. Emily cautiously approached, setting the coffee and pie on the table. The man looked up, his gaze sharper than before. Anything else she offered, trying to mask her unease. He studied her face as though noticing her for the first time. You heard me talking about Montgomery, didn't you? She felt a flush creep up her neck. I'm just the waitress. I wasn't eavesdropping. He tapped his phone on the table, a calculating smirk twisting his lips. I'm David Rosenfield, Chief Legal Counsel for Montgomery Innovations, and since you seem to have overheard something, I suggest you keep it to yourself. Emily nodded quickly, stepping back. Her heart hammered. The mention of Bill Gates' philanthropic deals and a lawsuit made her realize just how deep the troubles at Montgomery Innovations might be. She also recalled Charles's exhausted face that night he gave her a ride home. Suddenly, the scope of his worries snapped into focus. She brought Mr. Rosenfield the check, and he paid in a rush, leaving only a meager tip. When the man left, Emily felt a wave of sympathy for Charles. Billionaire or not, he was juggling enormous pressures. Jacob's health, corporate lawsuits, philanthropic deals. She hesitated, thinking about the business card tucked away in her drawer. Should she reach out? What would she even say? Don't be silly, she told herself under her breath, turning off the diner's lights. He doesn't need your pity. And you have your own problems. Yet, as she trudged back to her apartment that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding. Something that connected their two very different lives in ways neither of them could yet see. Days turned into weeks, and Emily found herself in an increasingly dire situation. Her mother's legal troubles demanded bail money that Emily didn't have. Her own tuition payments were due, and Lucy still needed funds for textbooks. Late one evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table, the stack of unpaid bills towering beside her. She felt like she was drowning, no matter how many shifts she picked up at the diner. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Marketing project deadline. Tomorrow. She rubbed her temples nearly in tears. It was then she remembered Charles Montgomery's card. She had told herself she wouldn't call, but desperation has a way of dismantling pride. She opened the drawer, retrieved the card, and stared at it for what felt like an eternity. The black and gold lettering glinted under the weak overhead light. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. This is crazy, she whispered. He's probably got bigger problems, and why would he even help me? But she had run out of options. She tapped the number, heart pounding. The phone rang 3 times before a polite automated voice said, "This is Charles Montgomery. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you." Emily exhaled, feeling oddly relieved and disappointed. She didn't know what to say, so she hung up, tears burning her eyes. Just as she set the phone down, it rang. "Hello, Emily," answered. Startled. "Emily. This is Charles. Everything okay?" His tone carried concern. She froze, searching for words. I'm sorry to bother you. I shouldn't have called." He cut in gently. "Hey, it's all right. Are you all right?" Tears finally spilled over. "No, I'm not," she admitted in a trembling voice. "I know this is crazy, but you said if I ever needed help." Her voice trailed off. She expected him to be dismissive or to ask for details about how she got his number. Instead, he offered calm reassurance. "All right, Emily," he said. "I meant what I said. Tell me what you need." She steadied herself. It's a long story. My mom's in trouble, legal trouble, and my sister's tuition, my own bills. I can't handle it all anymore. It feels like everything's crashing down. Charles was silent for a moment, and she could almost picture him pressing a hand to his forehead in thought. Finally he replied, I can help. I'd like to help. But only if that's what you really want. Emily hesitated, her pride battling her desperation. Yes, she whispered at last. Please, I thank you. All right, he said in that steady, comforting tone. Meet me tomorrow morning. I'll send a driver. She gave him her address, feeling both relieved and overwhelmed. After hanging up, she placed the phone on the table and stared at it, trying to process what she'd just done. She had taken a leap of faith, trusting that Charles Montgomery, a man she barely knew, would come through. She could only pray she wasn't making a terrible mistake. The next morning, a sleek town car arrived at Emily's building. She emerged onto the sidewalk, hugging her coat around her as the driver opened the back door. The ride seemed to take forever, weaving through Manhattan's rush-hour traffic. Eventually, they pulled up to an imposing skyscraper on Fifth Avenue, the headquarters of Montgomery Innovations. Emily stepped into the marble-floored lobby, feeling painfully underdressed. She wore her best blouse and a skirt, but surrounded by polished executives in designer suits, she felt like a fish out of water. A security guard checked her ID, then guided her to a private elevator that whisked her to the 50th floor. When the doors slid open, Charles Montgomery himself was waiting. Today he wore a tailored navy suit that accentuated his tall, lean frame. Despite his polished appearance, there was warmth in his eyes as he greeted her. Emily. Thank you for coming, he said, leading her down a corridor lined with abstract art. Let's talk in my office. She followed him into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. A massive mahogany desk sat near the far wall, but Charles gestured for them to sit in a comfortable seating area by a glass coffee table. Once they were both seated, he leaned forward, hands clasped. So how can I help? Emily took a shaky breath, launching into the story, her mother's eviction, the bail money, Lucy's tuition, her own looming debt. Charles listened without interrupting his gaze, focused and sympathetic. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment. I see, he finally said. I want to help Emily, but I suspect you'd be uncomfortable with a hand out. She nodded, blinking back tears. I would. I'm sorry if that sounds ungrateful. I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage. He offered a small smile. I respect that. So let's make it a job opportunity. We have a philanthropic branch, Montgomery Cares, which does outreach programs, scholarships, and community development. We need someone to assist with research event coordination and public relations. It would be part administrative, part creative. It's an entry-level position, but we pay well and there's room for advancement. Are you interested? Emily felt her heart leap. A real job, something beyond waitressing that could help her pay her bills and continue her studies. But her doubts surfaced. But I'm still in school, and I have no experience in corporate philanthropy. Charles waved off her concerns. You're studying marketing, right? That's a useful background. You'd get on the job training, and we can accommodate your class schedule. I believe in giving chances to people who deserve them. She searched his expression for any signs of pity. Instead, she saw sincere belief in her potential. She exhaled slowly. I'll do it, she said, voice resolute. Charles broke into a grin. Excellent. I'll have HR draw up a contract. We'll also arrange some immediate financial assistance for your mother's legal situation as a personal loan, if that's okay with you."
"Thank you,"
she whispered, overcome with relief and gratitude. Charles stood extending his hand. She rose to shake it, feeling a surge of hope that she hadn't felt in ages. In that moment, she realized that her life had just changed in a monumental way, thanks to one act of kindness, a fleeting moment where she had helped a boy in a wheelchair play the piano. Over the following weeks, Emily found herself navigating an entirely new world. She learned the ropes at Montgomery Cares, assisting with everything from planning charity galas to drafting social media campaigns. The first paycheck she received was more money than she'd ever seen in one place. She paid off her mother's bail debt, negotiated a payment plan for Lucy's tuition, and even caught up on her own bills. For the first time in her life, she felt financially stable. Meanwhile, her presence at Montgomery Innovations didn't go unnoticed by other employees. Rumors circulated. Who was this newcomer with no prior corporate experience? Some speculated she was Charles's new girlfriend, given the swirl of gossip that always followed the handsome billionaire. Others assumed she was a relative or a charity case. Yet Emily carried on focusing on her work, determined to prove she belonged. One evening, as Emily was finalizing details for a small fundraising event, she received a surprise visit at her desk. Jacob rolled up in his wheelchair, accompanied by a caretaker. "Miss Emily," he exclaimed, clearly excited. "Dad said you work here now." Emily laughed, standing to greet him. She bent down to meet him at eye level. "Hey, buddy. It's great to see you. How have you been?" Jacob beamed. "Better. Dad's got me trying a new therapy. It's tough, but I can handle it." He paused, his eyes flickering with mischief. "Do you like working here?" Emily nodded. "I do. Your dad gave me an amazing opportunity." Jacob leaned in closer. "You should come over to our place for dinner sometime. I can show you the new piano Dad bought me." Her heart softened at the invitation. "I'd love that." Jacob's caretaker smiled politely. "We just stopped by, because Jacob insisted on seeing you before his next therapy session. We should get going." Jacob waved a bright grin on his face. "See you soon, Miss Emily." Watching him leave, Emily felt a swell of affection for the boy. The memory of that night at the diner, the pure joy on his face, flooded back. She made a silent promise to never let him down. Just as life seemed to be improving for Emily, new complications arose. Her mother, out on bail, ignored pleas to enter rehab. She frequently called Emily, demanding more money. The tension took its toll on Emily's mental health. At work, she struggled to maintain focus during meetings whenever her phone buzzed with texts from her mother. One day, Winston from the diner texted her, "Your mom's here causing a scene. She's drunk." Emily's stomach lurched. She rushed to see Charles, who immediately arranged a car for her to head to the diner. Upon arrival, she found her mother ranting incoherently, stumbling near the cash register. Winston and a few customers stood back, not sure how to handle the situation. Emily gently guided her mother outside, tears stinging her eyes. She called Lucy, who agreed to meet them at the mother's apartment. The scene was ugly, with her mother screaming about how Emily was abandoning her now that she had a fancy new job. Lucy arrived, and together they calmed their mother enough to get her into bed. All the while, guilt gnawed at Emily. She had new resources, but she still couldn't save her mother from her own self-destructive path. The next morning at Montgomery Innovations, Emily arrived looking drained and upset. Charles noticed immediately. He took her aside. "You seem troubled," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Is there anything I can do?" She shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. "It's my mother. She's out of control. I'm so grateful for everything you've done, but I can't force her to change." Charles sighed, wishing he could offer a neat solution. He recalled the helplessness he felt with Jacob's mother during her final days. Not every problem could be solved with money. Sometimes all you could do was be there. He hesitated, then spoke softly. "Emily, if you ever need time off or additional support, just say the word. I'll stand by you." She nodded, touched by his understanding. Yet a part of her wondered how she could ever untangle herself from her mother's chaos. And she also worried that Charles's generosity might be tested if her personal life continued to spill into the workplace. As Emily wrestled with her family drama, a new storm was brewing at Montgomery Innovations. The patent infringement lawsuit escalated with damaging rumors circulating about unethical practices within the company. David Rosenfield, the same lawyer Emily had seen at the diner, held multiple closed-door meetings with Charles. The tension around the office was palpable. One evening, Charles asked Emily to stay late. She walked into his office to find him pacing, tie undone, face grim. "Emily," he began, rubbing his temples. "I'm sorry to drag you into this, but I need your help drafting a statement for Montgomery Cares. The press is hounding us, and I need to reassure our donors that the philanthropic side of the company remains unaffected." She nodded, feeling her stomach twist with concern. "Of course. Let's do it." They worked late into the night, crafting a message about integrity, transparency, and the continuing commitment to charitable work. Charles was grateful for Emily's calm presence, her knack for empathy translating into carefully chosen words. By midnight, they had a draft they were both satisfied with. Charles leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched into his features. "Thank you, Emily," he said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." She offered a reassuring smile. "We'll get through this." In that moment, an almost intimate silence settled between them. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Charles reached across the desk, gently placing his hand on hers. Their eyes locked. For a fleeting instant, Emily felt a surge of emotion, admiration, empathy, something else. But she quickly withdrew her hand, uncertain how to navigate the shifting boundaries of their relationship. I should head home," she managed, clearing her throat. "It's late." Charles nodded, awareness of the moment's gravity. "Let me have the driver take you." She agreed, grateful for the ride. But as she left, her thoughts churned. She owed Charles so much. She admired him deeply for his dedication to Jacob, his philanthropic vision, his kindness. But was there more than gratitude stirring inside her? The following week, Emily was busy finalizing details for a small fundraiser dinner. Among the high-profile guests scheduled to attend was Bill Gates, who had a long-standing relationship with Montgomery Innovations. The company's philanthropic efforts had always impressed Bill, and he was coming to show his support during these turbulent times. As the night of the event arrived, Emily found herself overseeing logistics in a grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. She wore a simple but elegant black dress, her hair pinned back. She moved from table to table, ensuring each seat had the correct name card. Each floral centerpiece was positioned perfectly. Charles was there, dressed in a tailored tuxedo. He appeared calm and poised, but Emily could sense the underlying tension. If tonight's event flopped, or if negative press overshadowed it, the philanthropic division could face major setbacks. Just as the event was about to begin, an urgent call came in for Charles. It was from Jacob's caretaker, who said Jacob had suffered a sudden seizure. Charles's face went ashen. He turned to Emily, apologizing profusely. "I have to go," he said, voice shaking. "I can't stay. Please, can you handle this? David Rosenfield is here, but I trust you more than anyone to make sure the event runs smoothly." Emily's heart clenched with worry for Jacob, but she gave a resolute nod. "Go. Take care of your son. I'll handle things here." With that, Charles dashed out, leaving Emily to manage one of the company's most critical events. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped into the limelight. Over the next few hours, she seamlessly guided the program, welcomed Bill Gates, and fielded tough questions from the press with poise. David Rosenfield lurked in the background, but Emily took the reins, ensuring the donors felt confident and respected. By the end of the night, the event was deemed a success. Donations poured in, and the media coverage was largely positive, focusing on Montgomery Care's mission rather than the lawsuit. Exhausted yet triumphant, Emily finally returned to her apartment near dawn. She was worried about Jacob and texted Charles to check in. Around sunrise, he replied that Jacob was stable but had to be hospitalized. Emily collapsed into bed, half-dressed with relief and concern warring in her mind. She had proved herself capable in Charles's absence, but the weight of her new responsibilities pressed on her. More than ever, she realized how intertwined her life had become with Charles and Jacob. A few days later, Charles invited Emily to visit Jacob at the hospital. She found the boy propped up in bed, coloring. His face lit up when he saw her. "Miss Emily," he exclaimed, dropping the crayons. She rushed over, hugging him gently, mindful of the IV in his arm. "Hey, buddy. How you feeling?" "Tired," he admitted, "but Dad says I might be out in a couple of days. And then you can come over for dinner, right?" Emily smiled, tears stinging her eyes. She glanced at Charles, who stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "Absolutely," she said. Charles stepped forward, placing a hand on Jacob's shoulder. Then he looked at Emily, gratitude etched on his face. "Thank you for the fundraiser, for everything. The donations were a huge success. Montgomery Cares can continue its programs uninterrupted." She blushed, brushing aside the praise. "I'm just glad it worked out." Jacob grabbed Emily's hand. "When I get out, can we play the piano together again?" Emily's heart warmed. Of course. Later, after Jacob dozed off, Charles led Emily into the corridor. His eyes shone with emotion. "I have something to ask you," he began. "Would you consider working more directly with me as a personal assistant and philanthropic consultant? You'd still oversee Montgomery Care's outreach, but you'd also help me navigate these storms, both corporate and personal." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "Charles, that's a big step." "Are you sure?" He nodded gently, taking her hand. "I've never been more sure. You have a gift for bringing out the best in people, my son, my employees and me. And I need you." She swallowed, her mind spinning with possibilities. This offer meant more responsibility and a chance to make an even greater impact. It also meant being closer to Charles and Jacob, building deeper bonds. Despite her lingering fear of entangling personal and professional lines, Emily sensed that this was the path destiny had laid before her. "All right," she said softly. "Yes." Their eyes met, a silent promise that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one born of kindness, courage, and a shared love for a small boy who found joy in playing the piano. In that moment, the billionaire father and the once struggling waitress both realized that real wealth was measured not just in dollars and investments, but in the relationships that transform our lives. Thank you for joining this emotional journey through triumphs, heartbreaks, and the power of a single act of kindness. Emily's decision to help Jacob play the piano was the spark that changed both of their worlds. From a modest diner booth to the sweeping corridors of Montgomery Innovations, we witnessed how genuine compassion can tear down walls and build extraordinary friendships. We hope this story has touched your heart and reminded you that no matter how different our backgrounds might be, empathy and love can unite us in ways we never imagined. If you found value in this tale, if it made you laugh, cry, or believe in the strength of humanity, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories that celebrate hope, resilience, and the power of a generous spirit. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.